Welcome to How to Cook That. I'm Ann Reardon and this episode is all about chocolate.
It's chocolate!
Chocolate.
Chocolate. I love chocolate!
This block of chocolate tastes amazing. It's got some really interesting flavours in it. It's won awards. It's just, This chocolate, by comparison, tastes, well, bland and boring. And I want to know why. Why can't I buy chocolate that tastes like this at the local store? And what have they done to this one to make it so bland? Well, in order to figure that out, I'm going to need some volunteers who love tasting chocolate.
Yeah, there's a very certain mood where I just really like chocolate, but most of the time I take it or leave it.
Chocolate is okay, maybe a little bit overrated.
Are you in the mood for chocolate?
No?
Clearly, I'm going to need some extra helpers for this one.
I love chocolate.
I love chocolate, especially dark chocolate.
Really love chocolate.
That's more like it. Now, I've purchased some blocks of chocolate, just a few. I've picked these bars specifically because they're all made from just 2 ingredients, and they're about 30% sugar and 70% cocoa beans. Cocoa beans are actually the seed inside the fruit that grows on cacao trees. Now, even though as humans this year we will consume 7.5 million tonnes of chocolate, most of us know very little about cocoa beans and cacao trees. If I was to ask my volunteers to name some different varieties of apples,
Golden Delicious? Pink Lady.
Granny Smith.
Carla.
Jazz.
they can do that super easily. But now if I ask them, can you name any different varieties of cocoa beans?
Probably not.
Absolutely not.
Cadbury, Nestle, Lindt.
I have no idea.
So even our chocolate lovers can't name any types of cocoa beans. There are lots of different cacao trees and the fruits are all different colours, and they used to be split into 3 main varieties with lots of sub-variants off that, and more recently it's been split into 10 different varieties. They keep doing more DNA testing on trees and trying to figure out which species are related to which ones and how it all fits in together. Obviously we can't taste all of the different cocoa beans, but I have bars made from 3 different beans, so we're going to try those today. The first one is the chuncho. Tell me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I have no idea. I think it's chuncho bean, which is one of the Forastero varieties, which is one of the most common.
Very creamy.
It's a little bit more, I'm going to say acidic.
Almost tasted slightly alcoholic, but not quite.
When you first bit into it, it was sort of quite rich and creamy, but then it went bitter afterwards.
Now let's try the Raguso beans, which are from the Trinitario variety.
Quite toffee-y.
A little bit of a sultana flavour.
Almost sugary and more milky.
I quite like that one, which is saying something.
And now to see if the more expensive beans taste better, these are the rare Chihuahua beans from the Criollo variety.
That's fruity. I could taste a strong berry taste in that.
I like that one. It was like sherbet.
Almost like dried fruit.
Apricot flavour.
Cherry flavour.
You know, I said the last one had a sultana flavour. I reckon that one's got a sultana flavour as well. Just a different type of sultana.
So the variety of cocoa bean does change the flavour of the chocolate bar. But as any chocolate maker will tell you, it's not just the type of bean, it's where the bean is grown in the world. And because of that, there's been an explosion of single origin chocolate bars, or bars that are made from beans from just one location. So let's do a quick world trip and see how that affects the flavour. We're going to start in Bolivia.
And that one's got like a fruity.
Cherry flavour.
Maybe a little bit woody.
It's my favourite so far.
But it was lovely.
Moving north to Venezuela.
I like that one. It was lemony. Interesting, very different.
Very intense, like it just like hits you.
It's not for me.
Next, let's take a trip to Uganda.
Very fruity. Ripe banana and butterscotch.
I like it.
Pretty different to the other ones.
Can't say it's my favourite.
Now for Madagascar.
Stronger flavour.
Woody.
Some dirt off the floor and then mixed it with like some grass. Like a porcelain flower.
That was nice.
Next, for beans that were grown in the southern part of India.
Tasted a bit like those fruity lollies you might get.
That has a bit of a bitter aftertaste.
And almost a little bit chemically at the end there.
Fruity, but bitter. Unusual.
Let's fly across to Vietnam.
Thin and crunchy.
It was hard to get it to melt in my mouth.
An unpleasant sort of nothing.
It tasted like cheap Easter egg chocolate.
And now for beans grown in Indonesia.
This one's lovely.
It was like an orange rind.
The flavour of chilies without the actual heat.
It's a bit earthy as well.
That was creamy and citrusy and delicious.
Next, we're off to the islands of the Philippines.
My favourite so far.
That's really different.
I really liked that one.
It's got something. I don't know if it's coconut or vanilla.
Maybe like cinnamon, but sweet cinnamon, like cinnamon sugar.
Hazelnut. Hazelnut. Philippines. Hazelnut.
And from the Philippines over to Papua New Guinea.
This one definitely has a smokier hit than the other ones.
Tobacco-y, woody.
Maybe a banana flavour there.
I have no idea.
And finally, beans grown in the Solomon Islands.
Interesting. Quite fruity.
Apricot taste.
A sour raspberry.
Cherry, citrus, like an undertone of bark. It was really bold, very acidic as well. I really liked that one.
That was yummy.
If we zoom out, you can see the cocoa is growing in what's called the cocoa belt, right across the middle, either side of the equator there. In fact, the majority of the world's cocoa is grown in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. Cacao trees like high humidity and lots of rainfall. They don't like cold temperatures. They won't tolerate under 3 degrees, and they don't like full sun. They like being shade dwellers under bigger trees. If you live outside of that cocoa belt area and you want to have a go at growing cocoa, then you will need to plant your tree in a pot indoors. I have one that is growing. This one's only about 1.5 years old. It won't bear fruit until it's about 4 or 5 years old, so it's a bit of a long journey. My taste testers definitely did seem to notice a difference though between beans that were grown in different parts of the world, and scientists are trying to figure out why that is. At first it was thought maybe it was different soil conditions, different rainfall, all of those different things, and now it seems like it could be a bit of that, but also linked to what happens to the beans after they are harvested on the farm. Once the cacao pods are picked, they get cut open right there on the farm, and inside is this white, gummy, fruity flesh that surrounds each of the cocoa beans. That all gets scooped out, and at this stage the cocoa beans taste so bitter that you can't eat them. If you were to try and make chocolate out of them like this, no one would like chocolate. It just wouldn't get eaten. To make it taste like the cocoa that we know, the beans have to be fermented, and that usually happens nowadays in big wooden boxes. The beans are piled into the boxes and packed down and covered, and they're left for several days. Then once they reach the right temperature, which lets them know that that fermenting has taken place, they are then turned or stirred or moved into a different box, and this just introduces air into the mix and allows different bacteria to start to work, and they're left for a couple more days. Now this is a crucial stage because it allows the yeast and the lactic acid bacteria and the acetic acid bacteria and some enzymes to all start developing the flavours in the cocoa beans, and it changes them from looking like this at the start to looking like this at the end. Now I have here 2 cocoa bars that are made from beans from the same farm, from the same country. Everything's the same, except one of them has been left to ferment for 5 days and one of them has been left to ferment for 6 days. So let's see if that makes a difference.
So the one on my right was like sweet and florally.
A bitter taste.
Very strong fruity flavour.
Like a bowl of smoked fruit.
And the one on the left was like coffee and a bit darker.
It was a little bit more creamier.
Nice and sweet, a bit of coffee.
It's like the flavours were a bit more muted and demure.
Which did you prefer, the 5-day or the 6-day?
I think I'd have to say the 5-day, just because it had more flavours to offer.
So even a minor change on the farm, like an extra day of fermentation, makes a big difference to what the end product tastes like. And what my tasters discovered was exactly the same as what's been reported in scientific studies, which is that the intensity of the cocoa flavour is decreased with longer fermentation. Scientists are also really interested in starting to study the difference in the bacterias in those fermentation boxes in different farms all over the world. And they've found there is quite a vast difference, and what bacterias are doing the fermentation are affecting the end product and the end flavour. So it may not just be the soil that it's growing in different countries affecting it, but rather the bacteria that are going into the fermentation box. And that's really interesting, because if they can start to narrow down which bacteria contribute to which flavours in the beans, they could take beans from one area that didn't have a very interesting flavour profile and add that bacteria in at the fermentation stage and really lift the quality and the money that the farmers are going to get for those beans. There's hundreds of different bacterias and enzymes, so figuring out which ones are contributing to what is going to take some time, but it's certainly very interesting. Once the beans have been fermented, they are then spread out to dry. And even this affects what the chocolate tastes like. Drying the beans slowly results in beans that have a fuller, more fruity flavour, and drying them quickly, you lose some of the flavour of the beans. After they've been dried, the beans are then packed up into bags and sent off to chocolate makers. So you can see before the chocolate maker even gets the beans, a lot of the flavour has already been predetermined by what happened to it on the farm. Now, it sounds like, yep, just standardise the process of what happens on the farm to make sure you get the best beans. But there's actually 5 million cocoa farmers around the world. 90% of the cocoa that is consumed in the world comes from smallholder farmers. They have 3 hectares or less. And most of those farmers have never had the opportunity to taste chocolate that was made from just their beans, let alone their beans at different stages of fermentation or the different process variations along the way. So they don't actually know the flavour difference that it's going to make if they treat it in different ways. And that's where the smaller chocolate manufacturers that are making relationships with the actual farmers have an advantage, because they can actually send them chocolate and feed them that information back so that they can make a better product. The bigger chocolate manufacturers, though, need so much chocolate. They can run education programs, but working with every individual farmer is just such a huge task that they're just going to end up with a lot of beans, some good quality and some not so good quality. So at the beginning, before we started all this, I asked my tasters if they liked dark Lindt chocolate, and they all did, apart from Dave, who doesn't love chocolate. He doesn't dislike it, just didn't love it. And then after they'd tasted all these other chocolates, I thought I'd just give them some Lindt chocolate to taste without telling them what it was or where it was from. And this was their reaction.
That one was quite dark and a bit sweet, but then also when I swallowed, it was a little bit acidic at the back of my throat.
There was no complex flavours in it. Completely boring.
Oh, I don't like that at all.
This one doesn't taste like dark chocolate. It's quite bland.
Flavourless.
So how did the Lindt chocolate and most other dark chocolates that you buy at the shop end up tasting so bland and boring? Well, once the chocolate makers get the beans, they need to sort them to get rid of any that look shriveled or like there's something wrong with them, and then they roast them. This kills any of the bacteria, and it also helps to develop the flavours that are in the beans. Then you need to take off the thin hull that's on the outside of the bean, and inside this is the cocoa. It's hard and it feels a bit like the texture of wood. Then that gets chopped up into smaller bits called cocoa nibs, and then the nibs get rolled between 2 stone rollers to break them down into smaller particles. And at this stage the sugar is added, and it's left to keep grinding between the rollers. Now, our tongues are very clever. They can detect particles that are so small our eyes can't even see them. So even though the chocolate looks smooth at this stage, if you were to taste it, you would say that it tasted a bit gritty. And that's the way chocolate used to be until one day back in 1878, Rudolf Lindt went home on the weekend and left the machines running. It's unclear whether that was accidental or a deliberate move, but when he came back on Monday, there was this super smooth, silky, dreamy, chocolatey mixture that had a really amazing chocolatey smell. And that's where we get the smooth chocolate that we're used to now. And that process of leaving it to keep going and keep churning is now called conching. Now, conching is great, don't get me wrong. It's wonderful because it reduces that particle size and separates out the particles so that we get that really nice melt on your tongue and smooth texture. But if you leave it to conch for too long, you get rid of all of the amazing flavours. So why not just conch it until the particle size is just right and then stop? Well, the advantage of conching for longer is it also gets rid of a lot of the acetic acid. It's evaporating off as it keeps going because the chocolate's slightly warm. So it's also getting rid of some of those not so good flavours. So if you have beans that are 100% good beans, good quality beans, have been fermented well, have been dried well, everything's great along the process, you can conch for just enough time and keep all those fruity flavours. But if you also have some not so good beans in there and some not great flavours, you'd want to keep conching for longer to get rid of the undesirable flavours. But that means at the same time you're getting rid of the good flavours, which gives you a bland, boring but consistent product that most of us think is what chocolate tastes like. But really, we've just missed out on all those amazing flavours. If you enjoyed this episode, do make sure you like, comment, share, and let the algorithm know so it shows it to other people. With thanks to my amazing patrons for all your support that allows me to do all the research involved in making these sort of videos. Make it a great week by being kind to others, and I'll see you on Friday.